Hello and welcome to this penultimate session of the conference. I'm Nick Timmins, it's my pleasure to chair it. This is a little more light-hearted than the rest perhaps. It's a bit of fun, but of course it's serious fun. A chance for four people to live the dream that probably everyone in this room has had at one time or another, being pensions minister for a day. When I first started writing about pensions some 30 years ago, I remember very clearly what almost everyone first said to me. Nick, they said the key thing you've got to understand about pensions is that they are a long-term contract. For the individual, they start saving at the right time, it's 50 years on average and may well be 80. And for those providing pensions, whether the state or the private sector, it's even longer. So what we need, Nick, and you've really got to understand this, is stability. Well, I'm happy to report that such has been the stability in pensions policy over the past 30 years that I've been kept partially occupied and could have been kept fully occupied writing about the highly malleable nature of this stability. Changes to pension policy seem to have come even thicker and faster over the years, sometimes the results of events, dear boy, sometimes the result of advice, for good or ill. And the NAPF, of course, always has plenty of good advice to offer, not least the launch as one of the centrepieces of this conference of its manifesto for the next government. Today, however, we're going to give four seasoned pension professionals, if they'll forgive me for calling that, the chance not just to proffer advice, but to tell us the one decision they would take if they were pensions minister for a day. And not even our most activist pension ministers, name who you will, have managed to take more than one decision daily about the future of pensions. Once they've made their pitch, then we'll put you on the spot as well, asking you to vote for which contender you would like to see installed on the fourth floor of Caxton House. So have your smartphones at the ready with the app, though of course on silent. And let me briefly introduce our four would-be pensions ministers. Adrian Bowling at the end, who is Pension Strategy Director for Legal and General, but is today wearing his hat as the Chair of Pensions Quality Mark. Lawrence Churchill, next one along, who is Chair of Nest. Nicola Smith, who's Head of Economic and Social Affairs at the Economic and Social Affairs at the TUC, and Carol Young, who's Head of Pensions and Benefits at the Royal Bank of Scotland. We're going to go in alphabetical order, and we're going to give each contender 4 minutes to make their pitch. And believe it or not, you'll see the 4 minutes ticking down on the clock, so if they go over, you can help me shut them up. And then it will be time to vote. Once they put their case, we'll have some questions from you, and then it will be time to vote. So let's get going. Adrian, your pitch.
Nicholas, thanks very much for the kind introduction. So for one day, I will have my hands on the levers of power. This is quite exciting after 34 years in the pensions industry. So I'm going to have to make this day really, really count. I'm going to have to focus on something which is really, really important. And I am critically aware, as I know this conference is, that 300,000 people a year arrive at retirement age with a DC pension pot. They now have the new freedoms of choice. And the freedom of choice is great if you know what you're doing, but if they don't, and many of them won't, then they'll be like rabbits caught in the headlights on the A1, and that's not normally a happy ending. So I want to set minimum standards for the help and support that pension schemes should give to members setting out on their retirement journey. And in particular, I want to focus on three areas where I want to set minimum standards. The first is around communications. The members of the schemes will need not just one phone call from TPAS, although as my predecessor said, one phone call is better than none. They will need clear communications from the pension scheme. And standards for clarity might be in terms of writing in terms of plain English, might be in terms of using the rather nice lexicon that Nest have developed to communicate with their members. In addition to clarity, there'll be standards for timing, because these communications need to start well in advance. They need to start at least 5 years before people get to the minimum age for accessing their money. Otherwise, all sorts of people will be tempting them with all sorts of things. They need to be in possession of the facts first. My second standard is around access, about providing access to the new freedoms. I've had a number of employers that have said to me, they don't want to offer this to their members. They want to live in a world where when somebody terminates their contract of employment and goes into what we used to call retirement, they can say, cheerio, off you go. But the standard will be about providing access. Schemes can choose how they do that. Some schemes will actually supply the products and supply all the new exciting flexibilities. Other schemes can partner with somebody else that wants to provide that. And what the scheme will have to do is to provide a seamless pathway for members to move across to whoever it is that's going to provide the bank account in retirement or whatever it is. So I'm not talking about OMO, about saying, well, you've got a right to go and transfer and go on and do something different if you want. I'm talking about trustees choosing a partner and effecting an introduction to members to that chosen, secure, trusted partner. My third standard is prompted by a conversation with a pension scheme that told me that the typical reading age for their members was somewhere between 9 and 11. There are a number of people out there like that will have difficulty with communications. So the third standard is an either-or. It's either you test the members' understanding to see that they have understood the communications, and if they haven't, then you feed them back into the process and send them around the loop again until they do understand. Or it's you set a default retirement income option for your scheme, a default choice that the trustees have chosen that will be suitable for the bulk of their membership, and a default choice that does not lock people in. So it's not irreversible. If they wake up 2 or 3 years into the default process and they want to change their mind and take control themselves, then they're able to do so.
20 seconds, Adrian.
So that's my 3 things: communications, access, and testing the understanding or having a default. And I want to leave you with just 2 final points, very quick ones. One is, I've chosen this because I can do this in a day. Pensions Act 2014 gives the Minister the reserve powers to set minimum standards by regulation, so I can get this done in my day. And my last final point as I die out is that you'll know that my colleague, the Chancellor, has said that this is their money. It's up to them what they want to do with it. I say to you, this might be their money, but you paid half of that into their schemes, so you do have an interest in how they spend it. They can only spend it once. Help them to spend it wisely. Thank you.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Right, Lawrence.
Okay. Well, it's great to be back home in Liverpool, pitching for your votes before you all beetle off home from this cavernous auditorium. Love, love me do. You know I love you. I love you so much, I'm proposing to secure you all a decent income in retirement. So try and see it my way, and we can work it out. Let me level with you as an honest politician. The state pension is just about going to keep you out of poverty. But I think you and your hard-working families deserve more, because I know you all work 8 days a week. Research reports again and again that people need between £15,000 and £20,000 a year for a comfortable retirement. Think about it, 20 grand. That's around median earnings. And how much is the state pension? 7.5. That leaves you 12.5 grand a year to come out of your savings. And actuaries like Adrian here will tell you you need a pension pot of £250,000 to fund it. Now, in my speech, I'm not going to forget to mention the deficit. The deficit in your pension fund. If you save 8% a year for your full working life, then you'll save about 150k. So it takes you half the way there now. That's why I'm announcing today that I intend to legislate for the auto-enrollment minimum to increase by 1% a year from 2019 until it reaches 12% in 2022. Then you can have a decent retirement income. But we need to do more for those who are part-way through their working life already. So for all employers who are offering a Save More Tomorrow scheme, in which at least half of their workforce participate, I propose to halve the employer's national insurance rate as an incentive to promote workplace savings. Now, I'm making these proposals because you want me to. As I go around Liverpool, I ask real people, is there anything that you want? Is there anything I can do? Just call on me, and I'll send it along. Just yesterday, I was in Penny Lane, talking to a fireman who just rushed in from the pouring lane after working a hard day's night. I also met a woman called Eleanor on her way back from church, and she said, help, I need somebody, help. Now her younger days had gone, she wasn't so self-assured. And out in the posh parts of Blundellsands, I met a title lady called Madonna, with children at her feet and asking how she was going to pay the rent. Give me money, that's what I want, she said. And a man called Yossi Hughes, whom I first met in the 1980s, when he said, give us a job. He's in his 60s now, and he's one of the 60% of people who want to continue to work beyond state pension age. So keeping people in the workforce not only boosts their retirement income, it boosts the tax take, and it boosts GDP. It's a win-win-win. And that's why I'm proposing that employers will no longer pay national insurance on any of their workforce beyond state pension age. And academic research shows that increasing labour market participation for older workers actually boosts youth employment too. The lump of labour fallacy has been completely discredited. So you've just got to call on me, yeah? But saving is no good if your savings aren't safe. Security is important, and there are inconsistencies in the current levels of protection. For a contract DC scheme with an insurer, there is no limit to the protection currently. But if you invest through a SIP, the limit is £50,000 if you invest in equities and nothing at all if you invest in commercial property.
And you've got 20 seconds.
So my final proposal is to announce the formation of a Savings Security Commission to look at how the UK's burgeoning savings can be most appropriately protected, including the concept of a PPF for DC. So I will secure you a decent retirement income. Vote for me, and you'll have to admit it's getting better. It's getting better all the time. Love me do. You know I love you. I'll always be true. So please please me with your vote.
Oh, that's brilliant. Nicola.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, if I was to find myself Pensions Minister for the day, the first thing I think I'd have to do is improve my ability to deliver speeches incorporating Beatles lyrics, like my eminent colleague here. But beyond that, I would want to set out a clear commitment to building on the huge policy success of auto-enrolment, seeking to extend its benefits to more workers and give more people a better chance of a secure retirement in the years ahead. Opt-out rates as low as 10%, young workers even less likely to decide to stop saving, and very low numbers of employers facing problems with the enrolment in the scheme. 4 million more employees already paying into pensions. This is the sort of pensions policy that we need more of. But there is far more to do, as the actual Pensions Minister realises, and the current Chancellor's new pension freedoms, presuming that in this job role swap no one else is going to be able to take over his job, have made that challenge even harder. If I could, I would pause his proposals until a properly thought-out solution to the broken annuities market could be developed. I think that auto-enrolment risks becoming a car crash or even a moderate Lamborghini crash if consumers find that they're going to be fiddled out of their new savings or unable to access the quality default accumulation options that they want. But there are also challenges to be fixed during the accumulation phase. To start with, too many people, particularly low-paid women, are losing out because their earnings aren't high enough to automatically trigger enrolment into a pension scheme. Half of the UK's part-time workers earn below the current personal allowance threshold, and the number of women who are going to be excluded from auto-enrolment is only going to rise if future governments raise the threshold further. If I was Pensions Minister, I'd commit to lowering this point back down to the £5,000 originally anticipated by the Pensions Commission. The governance of schemes that savers find themselves enrolled in is also a concern, because we know that improvements in governance in defined contribution schemes can help ensure that every pound saved gives a higher return and can also boost confidence in pension saving. While many savers are automatically enrolled into Nest, where trust-based governance structure means the best interests of savers are at the heart of scheme decision-making, many new pension savers are finding them in contract-based schemes at the end of complex investment chains where they have the least say of anybody in that chain as to what happens with their money. Moves to set up independent governance committees are a step in the right direction, but this is an area where we need more radical moves to improve the governance. Finally, over time, we need higher contribution rates if auto-enrolment is going to be a success. Minimum rates, overstated as they're actually only on a band of an employee's earnings, not on overall salary, are simply not enough. And there's recent concerning evidence from ONS that some employers who are already making higher contributions may be beginning to level down because there is perhaps a perception that the 8% on an earnings band is adequate to provide secure retirement incomes. I think that it would be the time to start discussions, I've only got a day, with consumers, employers and the pensions industry about what the sorts of realistic timetable might be for future rises, and to set long-term aspirations for where employer contribution rates could go to match the very best in the world. Australian employers, with plenty of notice and time to phase in changes, currently pay 9% on total pay, not on an earnings band, and on track for even higher contribution rates. The first step would be to move to set a timetable for paying contributions on entire earnings rather than on the band, gradually moving to reduce the lower point of that earnings band down. Auto-enrolment, developed over time with a commitment to evidence and consensus at its heart, is a model for what good pensions policy making can look like. Building on these principles, my ambition in the 7 to 12 hours, depending on what you think the working schedule of our pensions minister is, would be to set in train its next important stage, seeking all the time to give people a greater chance of a secure retirement rather than a potential car crash. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Carol.
So, Pensions Minister for one day. Despite the maxim that a week is a long time in politics, I think we can all agree that a day is the blink of an eye for pensions policy, where meaningful change plays out over timescales, better measured in units of whole governments or parliaments than days or weeks. But one day is all that's on the table, which got me wondering what difference could be made in a single day in office. My conclusion is that I'd prefer not to recklessly push through rapid reform. That's why a vote for giving me a day in office would be a vote to establish a commission for the consideration of unintended consequences. Those of you who heard Joanne Seegers outlining the NAPF's manifesto yesterday will note that my policy builds on their excellent suggestion of establishing an independent commission by specifically appointing them to act as guardians of measured policy development. We need this because it is established, most notably by the distinguished chap on your left, Columbia professor and sociologist Robert K. Merton, that any purposive social action, such as setting pension policy, can fall prey to unanticipated consequences. Merton actually listed 5 possible causes, including ignorance and error, but the one that stands out for me is immediate interest overriding long-term interests. Those of you who heard Dr. Peters' session this morning might now recognise this as chimp behaviour. So, for example, hastily announcing policy changes with long-term consequences in the run-up to general elections. Now, lest you think I'm unfairly singling out historical pensions ministers and chancellors, it's worth taking a moment to talk about our friend on your right here, who serves as a salutary reminder to all would-be policymakers of the risks of unanticipated consequences. The story goes that the British colonial government in India became concerned about the number of venomous cobra in Delhi as then known, so they offered a bounty payment for each dead snake. At first all was well, and the snake population declined. But then the market kicked in, and people began to breed cobras to kill them and generate an income. Learning of this, the government quickly scrapped the bounty payment, leading to the now devalued snakes being set free and the cobra population increasing. Legislators beware of unintended consequences coming back to bite you. Now, those of us engaging daily with the permanent revolution in pensions policy could be forgiven for thinking that grappling with the odd snake might present a bit less of a challenge than vying with the simultaneous implementation of auto-enrolment, charge caps, freedom and choice, guidance guarantees and tax changes, to name but a few. But in all seriousness, we need a system with the inbuilt discipline to distinguish between a pretty good idea and a fully fledged policy. As it stands, many genuinely welcome concepts run the risk of failing to deliver as headline-grabbing announcements usurp reflection time, that chimp again, and we hurtle towards overlapping implementations. Politics will probably always have a role to play in pensions, but we do need to avoid short-term party politics unduly influencing long-term policy. That is why, as Pensions Minister for a day, I would establish an independent commission to ensure that the unintended consequences of pensions policies are properly thought through. It would put a brake on government, it would focus on sensible timescales for implementation, and most importantly, it would avoid immediate political interest overriding longer-term pension savers' interests. We have the time to think this through properly, and we should. I hope I can count on your vote. Thank you.
Very good. Well, now it's over to you to ask some questions. You want to, around the plea for sanity that comes here, building on auto-enrolment, or for Lawrence Churchill's incredible ability to pitch at least 4 policies into his single one-day decision as Minister, or to Adrian saying that it's up to the providers of pensions to support people better. So, questions, please. And don't all sit there in complete and utter silence. You must have something you want to say. One down there. And after that, there's one there.
John Gray, London Borough of Newham. I'm being devil's advocate here, but Carol, politics is important, and pension decisions are political at the end of the day. You're making decisions about public spending, tax relief for the wealthy versus payment for the poor. Without politics, life is pretty meaningless.
So politics absolutely has a role to play, as I believe I said, but there is I would distinguish between that and short-term party politics. Some of the things that we've seen that are most successful have been born through cross-party consensus. Auto-enrolment is one of the best examples of that. The position on tax relief is one of the worst at the moment. I believe as it stands, we might see in the next government the LTA scrap set at 1 million, set at 1.25 million. We might see tax relief go to a single rate, or we might see it, how would that work with salary sacrifice? And we don't know what will happen with the annual allowance. People can't plan and implement properly with that level of uncertainty. So politics, yes, but short-term party politics, no.
You have a hand up there. Well, it doesn't matter which order.
Mark Fawcett from Nest. Adrian, I'm curious about your default retirement income product. Could you flesh that out a little, please?
With pleasure. It's down to the trustee. So really, remarkably like the default investment funds we have at the moment, where the minimum standards require the trustees to take consideration of their members and to create an investment fund that they believe will meet the needs of their members. So the same applies in retirement, that the trustees will look at the particular membership they've got, they'll analyse their needs, and they will create a default retirement income vehicle that will meet their needs. It'll be different for different schemes. Some will be more secure, some will be less secure, some will be more flexible, some will be less flexible. It'll be down to the trustees to choose what's right for their members.
Thank you. And there's a question there behind.
Good morning. My name is John Husband, and I'm a trustee of the Mirror Pension Scheme, the one that Mr. Maxwell robbed. And in a previous life, I was a financial journalist on the Mirror. I just direct this initially at Adrian and then the panel. Adrian, when I was interviewing you many years ago, you told me the best thing about a pension is you can't touch it till you retire. In the light of the present proposals, what would you think is the best thing about pensions today and the worst?
Right, gosh. Well, you can't touch it until you're 55 nowadays, of course. I think the worst is that you might have spent it before you get from 55 to 65. So that's the worst thing about it. The best thing about them is that they could still provide you the wherewithal to enjoy the best years of your life, which is the period after work when you've got all that time and freedom on your hands.
Does anybody else want to pick up that issue?
Well, John, I'll have a go if you like, but I think the best thing about pensions today is that everyone's talking about it. I think the dose of reality and the realisation that someone else is not going to pick up the tab for your standards of life in older age is beginning to seep in, like osmosis, I think, through the population. And the worst thing, we haven't put enough money in, and you can't spend what you haven't saved.
Yeah. Nicola?
I think think I would build on that and say that, you know, the best thing is that we're seeing saving rates go up at a rate that is relatively unprecedented given the large falls we've seen in recent years, particularly, as I set out, for younger workers who seem to be even less likely to opt out according to what surveys there have been so far of auto-enrolment than those who were approaching retirement. But the worst thing is the real risks there are to these new savers once they move towards accessing their pension income from simply removing the point that you raise, which is that you can't access the money until you retire. Now, no one's arguing, I certainly am not, and the TUC isn't, that the annuities market was providing perfect opportunities for people and giving everybody the decumulation option they wanted. And, you know, in fact, there's a very strong case that it was broken and needed serious reform. But we are very, very worried that simply removing that entire system and replacing it with a free market free-for-all, which, you know, pretty much puts people at risk of taking down too much money too quickly, spending far too little, making all sorts of very complex, difficult financial decisions, which would be incredibly difficult for any of us to make an assessment of, let alone people who haven't spent a career working in the pensions or financial services industry, without any independent advice. And I think the speed at which that change is happening is probably the very worst thing of all, because if others have pointed to the need for consensus and for fully thinking through what all of the consequences might be for savings, for wider confidence in pensions, and for some of the very positive aspects of the consensus that we've built up around the need to increase saving in years ahead, simply haven't been considered.
Yeah. Carol, best thing about pensions?
Well, it's probably fitting that I've fallen victim to being a prey of unintended consequences, because when I married a man named Young and swapped a surname beginning with B for one beginning with Y, he didn't warn me about the perils of being at the end of the line. That said, I think given that I have argued for consensus, I think this rather makes my point, which is that we are all saying to a great degree the same thing. The good thing is that people are talking about it and talking about the need to save. The bad thing is that they either might not save enough or that they might not use it wisely when they come to spend it.
I love the title, Commission for Unintended Consequences. That sounds wonderfully Swiftian, you know, a modest proposal. The small risk it might be is it might itself produce unintended consequences. And there is a trade-off, isn't there? Because you don't want things happening too fast, but I occasionally sit back and think, you know, by the time they get to 2017, you know, it will have been 12 years since the Turner report to get in essentially what Turner recommended. And that seems more than, it's kind of half a lifetime. It's not, you know, it's a quarter of a lifetime. I mean, it's taken forever. And everyone, you know, and now everybody thinks this is a good policy. So you kind of you do worry sometimes how you get the balance right between going fast enough on the right things and stopping people doing really daft things in a hurry. Are there any more hands up? Is it, yes, down here. This side of the hall is extremely reticent. You should join in.
Thank you. It's Bob Clark from Lloyd's Superannuation. This might be a bit facetious, but with pensions becoming more savings, I wonder whether in that day you might move from DWP to the Treasury.
As the Minister, you mean?
As the Minister.
Well, as the Minister, of course, there is an argument that being Pensions Minister actually, the Pensions Minister always does really reside in the Treasury, on the grounds that almost anything that gets decided that involves any form of public spending has to go through them.
I think I would try to make some sort of ministerial decision about considerably downgrading the powers of the Treasury and moving a whole range of their powers over to the DWP. So advance notice to civil servants that that might be beyond the cards.
I think that was a reference to the chimp, wasn't it, inside your brain? I think that, I mean, what's obvious, I think, is pensions is so important to society now that you've got to have a team approach. I think so, whether it lives in the Treasury, whether it lives in DWP, you've got to have the thing as joined up as you possibly can. Because, you know, issues like tax relief, issues like NIC contributions, you know, they're scattered around different departments of government at the moment. I'm not sure that trying to reconfigure government is actually the right answer. You would just get more teamwork.
Although you could argue you'd have more chance of that teamwork if more decisions were being taken in the DWP, perhaps within a more collaborative frame of operation.
I think you've got to bear in mind that the Treasury is all about trying to stop other departments spending money, and DWP, in fact, are one of the biggest spenders in terms of distributing money to others. And the triple lock is an excellent example of it. The triple lock was introduced by DWP, by the pensions minister, in the early days of the coalition government, and he very proudly went out and said, I have spent more money than any other minister in this coalition so far. And that set the Treasury running. What's Steve saying? Where's he spent this money? They hadn't woken up. So if you put the two together and you put pensions minister inside the Treasury and all the plans had to go through the Chancellor before they could come out, then I don't think you'd have seen exciting things like the reforms to the state pension that we've had and the triple lock. So no way, keep the two miles apart, so far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
Francois Barker from Eversheds. All of those initiatives seem to me to be about trying to provide a pension for retirement. If that is right, what would you do about the budget proposals that effectively go against that and say you can cash out and buy your Lamborghini? Is that one for Carol's consideration of an unintended consequences commission?
It was there in my thinking, Francois. If you go through the list of reasons, I absolutely did focus on the immediate interest overriding long-term interest point, and I think that is genuinely what the risk is there. But some of the others are things like ignorance, acting on incomplete information, and we don't yet know how people are going to react. And error, so maybe errors in analysis. The fifth one, which people talk about a little bit less, is actually, I think it's called a self-defeating prophecy. So unintended consequences are not always bad, and so lest I sound too depressing, there is, what that fifth thing actually refers to is that the fear of something happening actually leads to action being taken in advance that prevents the thing happening itself. And, given that I actually won't have a day right now, I've just got to keep my fingers crossed that maybe that's what we'll pull off.
I think we'd very much want to pause, set up a commission, a version of Carol's commission with clear timetables. People have been given these flexibilities. Maybe there's going to be a need to do something in the interim while this pause is taking place to provide people with additional flexibility beyond what they had with the previous annuity rules. Suggestions that have been made include giving people and increasing the age by which people would have to annuitise, making drawdown easier in the short term, and starting, quick and focused discussions about how you could rethink traditional annuities so as to provide both better access to good quality default accumulation products, and at the same time as recognising that the entire policy of auto-enrolment was built around the principle of inertia, which means that most people won't take decisions about their financial investments. They will remain in the default fund, and they need a pension system that provides them with a secure retirement. And so it's incumbent upon policymakers to design options for the decumulation phase of pensions that will provide people with those opportunities. And at the moment, the huge risk, as I have said and others have, is that that simply isn't available. And the case for a pause and some rapid reconsideration of how that can better be guaranteed, I think, is pretty pressing.
I think from my point of view, Francois, you've posed a false opposite. I don't think the issue is the action of taking cash out at all. The issue is how much cash have you got left, and at what point in your life cycle should you be able to have access to pension savings. When you think about it, there's no reason why freedom and choice should be confined to people over state pension age or around state pension age. Look to situations earlier in life as well. In a sense, harking back to what Gabrielle was talking about in terms of the holistic balance sheet for individuals, we all know it's true, don't we? We've got housing wealth, we've got the wife out to work and so on. So each of us has got different balance sheets and different aspects of protection. I'm actually quite a fan of what they do with KiwiSaver, where after a certain time, you're allowed to draw down some of your pension saving in order to put down a deposit on a house. And I think that's a holistic concept about retirement, because you're accumulating a different type of wealth, which is going to be important to you in your later years. So a little bit of a false opposite for me.
Francois, I think the freedom and choice is like toothpaste. Once it's out of the tube, you can't put it back in again. So there's no point in us opposing it. There's no point in us trying to delay it and tell the people that reach retirement age next April that they can't have it after all. They'll have to wait until we've had some more thoughts about it. It's there, it's out, it's in the public domain. We just need to work with it. And we need to help the scheme members to work with it. And the overriding principle that they need to remember is the money in their pension pot, they can only spend it once. And that's why we need pension schemes working under some minimum standards to help them understand that and to help them exercise that very powerful freedom and choice that the Chancellor has given them.
And with that wonderful elision out of a question to repitching your argument all over again, I think we've reached the moment of truth, which is now when we need to vote. So you have your four candidates here. You have your Adrian's minimum standards, Lawrence's multifaceted proposal for a decent retirement income, and the best Beatles skit going. Nicola building on the cess of auto enrolment, and Carol Young's wonderfully Swiftian independent commission for the consideration of unintended consequences. So can you get your apps going and start pressing the button? Do we have is it 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order? Yep, 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order. So 1 for Adrian, 2 for Lawrence, 3 for Nicola, 4 for Carol, and it ticks away, and at some magic moment, this will all come up on a screen. Oh, gosh, that was fast, wasn't it? So, by a country mile, Carol is the winner. Carol, I'm delighted to present to you with your red box. In it, you will find the first submission from your officials, advice on how to set up your own commission and the Independent Retirement Savings Commission, as recommended by the NAPF. I think Joanne Seegers is already writing you a letter of congratulations and asking for an urgent meeting. And as to the others, commiserations to the other contenders, and no doubt your time and your ideas will come. Our next speaker is Nick Robinson, who might give us some idea of whether any of these ideas might be politically acceptable. And certainly will have views on what's happening in the next 6 months and on the